Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast, where we talk to customers and experts about how to create products and services that feel like time well spent. And now, here are your hosts, experienced strategists, Dave Norton and Aranza Savas.
Welcome to the Experience Strategy Podcast. I'm Aranza Savas.
And I'm Dave Norton.
And Dave, today we are joined by Jon Picoult. So Jon, you may know, is the founder of Watermark Consulting and a leading expert in customer and employee experience. He's been featured by dozens of media outlets. You may have seen him in the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, NBC News, Forbes, and others. And his work these days really focuses on how memory shaping helps to influence great brand experiences that last well into the future. And we're excited to talk to him today about how we create deep and lasting, truly memorable impressions on our customers. Jon, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's great to be here with you both.
So as we dive into this, Jon, let's start just by talking about the thesis of your latest book.
What's always bothered me is sort of the long list of indignities that companies subject their customers and in many cases their employees to, from long queues to unhelpful staff to complicated communications that are hard to decipher. And what always bothered me is there were so many simple, straightforward things that organizations could do to remove some of those incivilities from the lives of their customers and their employees. And I really wanted to put on paper those ideas, those simple, straightforward strategies, because I think companies do such a disservice to the stakeholders that they work with when they subject them to those incivilities.
Yeah. And you outlined 12 key principles, as I recall, in the book. Can we breeze through those at a high level to set the stage?
Wow. So it'll be a quick breeze, but essentially the 12 principles are really grounded.
Just distill a whole book in 1 minute.
I'll talk really fast. The 12 principles are really grounded in cognitive science, in psychology. And as you alluded to in the introduction, the reason for that is because in my view, customer experience is really ultimately an exercise in memory shaping. So for example, two of the key principles really they owe sort of their origin to the peak end rule. Daniel Kahneman and the peak end rule, which most of your audience, I'm sure, is familiar with. But it's really about how do you apply that within the customer experience arena. And so one principle is about creating peaks and avoiding valleys that people are going to remember and can either elevate their brand impressions or anchor them. The notion of finishing strong and the recency bias that we all have, where the last thing that happens to us exerts a disproportionate influence on our overall perception of the encounter we just went through. That's another example of a principle. Making it effortless for people, easy for them to transact business and interact with a company, creating simplicity for them, removing complexity from their lives is another example of a principle. Stirring emotion, because experiences that are infused with emotion are more memorable than those that are not. Giving people the sense of control, because when we have ambiguity in our lives, we get uncomfortable and we feel less good about experiences we're going through. Being an advocate for customers, because advocacy is something that people don't often see from the companies they patronize. And so when they see a tangible demonstration of advocacy, it actually creates one of those peaks that forms memories that drives repurchase and referral behavior. Creating relevant and personalized experiences. Relevant and personalized experiences because they are They are sort of in harmony with exactly what we need at a particular point in time, a particular moment. Those are more memorable. We enjoy those in the moment and we remember them fondly into the future. Paying attention to details because our mind is always scanning our environment for clues that help to either reinforce a brand impression that we're forming or refute it. So managing the details are important. Creating pleasant surprises for your customers is another part of the strategy because that's a way to create peaks that they remember. And then lastly, the notion of recovering with style, because companies, no matter how good you are, there will always be failures in the customer experience, but you don't have to resign yourself to creating a dissatisfied customer because the way our mind works, if you knock the cover off the ball on the recovery, you're actually finishing strong and creating a peak that people are going to remember that can eclipse the negativity of the failure itself. So there you go. That's 12 principles in 120 seconds.
Well done. I feel like you should get a medal or a trophy for that. And you did take a huge body of cognitive science and distill it into some highly relevant, I'm sure by design, and applicable principles. And I think one of the main reasons that you have focused on that approach is so that all companies have the ability to do and be better for their customers and companies, and to make these ideas more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that when I have studied the beloved businesses out there, the legendary companies in customer experience, and when you study them, what you begin to see is that they are all really dipping in to the same toolbox. When it comes to choreographing that onstage experience that's visible to the customers, they're really all dipping into the same proven set of techniques for shaping those onstage experiences, creating experiences that people both enjoy in the moment and remember fondly long into the future. And again, that was another reason why I wrote the book, is because a lot of people look at these companies that do this so well and they're in awe, and they should be, because they deserve a lot of credit for creating raving fans day in and day out. But when you really peel the onion and you look at it, they're using techniques that are really accessible by any organization, from a Fortune 50 global enterprise behemoth right down to the local mom and pop corner store.
Do you mind me asking, who are some of your favorite brands that you look to as the ones that are using these kinds of principles?
Sure. I think, it's the usual suspects. I don't think there are any that will surprise you. I'm certainly a big fan of Amazon, and they certainly capitalize on the whole idea of making it effortless for customers. I'm a big fan of Costco, of Ritz Carlton. I think IKEA does a lot of things right. If we look back in history, it doesn't exist anymore, but I look at a company like ING Direct, which became the largest savings bank in the country in a very short period of time. They're an organization that I certainly admire. And then, there are also, when I was writing the book, I also wanted to make sure that it wasn't just about the usual suspects, and that there were some companies that people haven't likely heard of that are doing really interesting things, and have proven themselves by being in business for more than just a year or two. And so two companies that fall in that category are one called BILT Incorporated, which makes what they call 3D intelligent instructions, and a company called Framebridge, which has sought to really redefine the business of framing collectibles and photographs and art. And so they're two examples of companies that are rapidly growing organizations that are also leveraging the principles, I think, very effectively.
What does it specifically look like at Framebridge, for example?
Well, so if you've ever framed a a picture, a collectible, a piece of art, it's rarely a great experience. The founder of Framebridge, what spurred her idea for the business was she had gone on a trip visiting some national parks, took some photographs, wanted to get them framed. And it was actually not photographs. It was she bought some posters from the national parks. And so she went to get them framed, and then, she's got to go to a physical store. She's got to pick out the frames, get them framed. Then she gets the bill, and the bill for the framing was like 6 or 7 times the cost of the posters themselves. And she just thought it was outrageous. So what Framebridge does that I think is very smart is everything is done online. So if you have digital photos, it's very easy to send those to them. But if you have physical things that you want to send, they'll actually send you packaging so that you can get it to them very easily and make sure that it's not harmed in any way. They really curate a set of frames for the consumer, because when you go to a framing store, you can almost be overwhelmed very easily by just the complexity of all the choices and whatnot. So Framebridge curates it. It reduces cognitive complexity, which again makes for a better experience. And they pay great attention to the details, even right down to the materials that they use on the back of the frame to hang it. Because what they discovered was there were certain materials that if you use it and years later you take the frame off the wall, it's going to leave a mark that's hard to get off. And so they use materials where it's not going to leave any trace. But the number one thing that I love about Framebridge, and this is really what I mean about memory shaping, is they deliver a pleasant surprise at the end of the experience, which, presuming all the fundamentals are in place, okay, meaning it shows up at your door when they said it was going to, it's not like cockeyed and weird, and the frame is actually well constructed. But what they do is they send a personalized note with every product, every framed picture that goes out. And it's personalized because it actually is referencing what you sent them to be framed. Mm-hmm. The first time I saw this with my son, who sent some photographs in that he had taken to create a holiday gift for his grandparents. We opened up this package, and there's this typed postcard addressed to him that's referencing this beautiful vista in the photo that he took, and how they could, almost smell the fresh mountain air. And we were just stunned because this is an organization that frames hundreds of thousands of pieces every year. And in the book, I do talk about how they actually do that, how they accomplish that, and create that personalization to scale. But the bottom line is, today, if somebody asks me, John, I need something framed, where should I go? I'm going to suggest Framebridge. And it's not only because it was effortless to work with them, but the thing that stands out, what am I going to do? I'm going to tell them this story of wait till you get your frame back and wait till you see what note they're going to send along with yours. So it creates one of those memories that people want to tell others about.
So lovely. Such a great example too. And I think we're seeing more and more of that, especially from companies that are starting in digital and then transferring into brick and mortar, because I believe they now are doing some brick and mortar as well.
That's right. They've started brick and mortar stores as well. Yeah.
I saw them on the Upper East Side.
I've got a framing project. I'm going to work on it as soon as we finish the episode. So
I recommend you use that. I'm a raving fan.
Referral in action, right? Yeah, but that's what we all want for our brands, right? We want to delight people, engage them, thrill them to such a degree that they can't stop talking about us.
Yeah, and just to take a step back, I think what the Framebridge example is just a beautiful illustration of is how it's so important to not just focus on the logistics, the mechanics of the experience that you're delivering, of the product or the service that you offer. Those are critically important, obviously. You want to make sure you're nailing the fundamentals and nailing the basics. But there is also this element that you can inject into the experience that helps to shape those memories, to really create that indelible impression, to do something that deviates from the script, the standard script that people would expect when, in this example, they're going and getting something framed. Because when it deviates from the script in a positive, in a pleasant way, that's what you walk away remembering. And so I think that's just the important lesson here is the idea that the operations piece, the logistics, the brass tacks, critically important, but there's also this power to choreographing the experience in a way that people just don't expect. And that's what's going to forge memories, long-term memories that are going to elevate your business for the future.
So, John, why does that deviation become the thing that people remember? What's going on cognitively?
Right. So the key, fundamentally, the key to us remembering anything is we've got to focus our attention on it. That's like number one. Job number one is if you're going to create any kind of memories, your brain has to be focused on it and you have to be paying attention. And so if you think about it from a business standpoint, if you're just a sea of sameness, if there is nothing that stands out about your business, if it's just all the typical stuff, it's unlikely that your brain is going to pay any extra attention. It's just, you're just going to kind of wander through that experience, sort of aimlessly, and you're probably not going to remember anything about it. So the key is that when things deviate from the script, when there's something unusual, and it could be very positive or it could be very negative, those are the things that draw our attention. And the minute that attention is drawn, that's what's going to start, the neurons are going to fire, and that's what's going to create the long-term memories. And so, that's one key part of the cognitive science behind memory making that I think is important from a customer experience standpoint. The notion that what most of the experience every business delivers is forgettable. And it's not because the business is bad. It's just the way that our brains are wired. We don't remember our experiences like a streaming video, like a continuous movie. It's not like we remember every frame in the experience, and then there's some algorithm in our head that calculates whether or not we're satisfied. Rather, instead of remembering things as a streaming video, we remember it as a series of snapshots. And those snapshots are only taken, the shutter only clicks, it only snaps when there's something that draws our attention. And that's the importance of creating, those peaks in the experience that people will remember, like that personalized note from Framebridge. But also on the flip side, if you do something really awful to your customers, it creates one of those valleys, the reverse peak, that they again will remember. And so, that's
let me stop you there for just a second. Let me ask you a question about that. You're saying that for you, and I would have to agree, getting that note was actually the peak part of the experience, but it was also the end of the experience, wasn't it?
That's right. And that's a very important point as well, because if you go back to the science behind this, the peak end rule, in terms of how we remember things and how impressions are formed, what people are going to remember are the peaks, or what I also call the valleys, the opposite of the peak. But they're also going to remember the last thing that happens to them. Mm-hmm. And so in the case of Framebridge, that's why this is just beautiful choreography on their part of the experience. To open up that package, which is the end of the experience with your framed picture and whatnot, and to see that that personalized note, sitting on top of this beautiful framed item. When that comes at the end of the experience, just the way our brains are wired, the last thing that happens to us in an encounter exerts a disproportionate influence on our overall perceptions and memories of the experience. And so that gets to the principle that I call finishing strong. You always want to end on a high note, because if you end on a low note, it's almost, this bias is so strong that even if something earlier in the experience was really positive, even if there were peaks there, if you end on a low note, forget it, game over. A great example of this to me is in the airline industry, with airlines not really appreciating the baggage collection touch point. I mean, I could have the flight attendants could be super courteous. There could be great streaming entertainment on board. The flights could have been completely on time. But if I get down to the baggage carousel and I've got to wait 45 minutes for my bags to roll out, what do you think I'm going to remember about that travel experience? Mm-hmm. That's it. That's what I'm going to remember, because it's the last.
I guess the reason I asked that question is because typically when you think about peak and end, they're two different moments in the overall experience, but you're saying they can be the same.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that you can create a peak, and I want to be clear that it's not. There's not just one peak.
One peak.
Okay, right. I said that what you remember are snapshots with a plural, and so it's not that there's just one peak. There might be several. But can one of them come at the end and as such capitalize on both the idea of creating the peak and finishing strong? Absolutely. And, this gets to I mentioned earlier the idea of recovering in style, that's one of the 12 principles. Well, if you think about any business that is faced with a failure in its customer experience, it's quite likely that that failure and the resolution of that problem is going to be coming at the end of the episode, the end of the encounter. And so it underscores how important really building strong recovery into your business model is. You want to plan for the worst. Like I said, even the legendary companies, things go wrong. But if you don't get it right on the recovery, it's really going to come back and hit you hard. Why? Because not only is it a valley, but it's a valley that is that's coming in at the end of the experience.
Right. So end with Everest.
Exactly. Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit more about this idea of recovering with style. What could that look like? Where have you seen that done well?
So I think the key with recovering with style is organizations need to understand that they don't have to resign themselves to creating a dissatisfied customer when something goes wrong. And when something goes wrong in the experience, what I would encourage them to think about is, how do you turn this into a peak? Not just how do you get through it, how do you muddle through the recovery, but how do you actually orchestrate it so that it's a peak? Because if you do that, then you actually are going to eclipse the negativity, the valley of the failure itself. And this is something that's been studied quite a bit. And the two of you and your listeners might be familiar with the term service paradox. But that's what this is called, because it's been studied quite a bit. And it's the idea that if you overcorrect on the recovery, you could end up with a more loyal customer after the recovery than what you had before the failure. And so it just underscores just the upside potential that you have if you recover well. So you asked for an example of recovering in style, and there's one that just comes right to my mind. It is, without question, the best service recovery I've ever experienced. It was a personal experience, so I know it's true. I've never seen anything like it before. And it actually had to do with when I was an executive at a financial services company, and this company ran an annual recognition event at lush resorts for their top performing salespeople. And for this particular year, it was at the Ritz Carlton in Naples, Florida. And my wife was accompanying me to the trip. There's a black tie event one night of the trip. She bought this beautiful dress to wear. She sent it off to the Ritz Carlton to get pressed, because in her suitcase it got all wrinkled. And it came back the next day, and they had shrunk it down to the size of a Barbie doll. Like, no joke. I mean, there was no way that she was going to fit into it. And I mean, I'm not a woman, but to hear my wife tell the story, like, that's the doomsday scenario. That's even worse than showing up at the event and seeing other people wearing the same dress, because the event's just a couple days away. She's got nothing to wear, totally freaking out. And so, the recovery that they engineered was just remarkable. I mean, I called down to the front desk. I spoke to the hotel manager. And here's another example of a peak and how it can come in surprising ways. When I explained to the hotel manager what was going on, I will never forget what he said to me. He said, "Mr. Picoult, I am going to take care of this for you.
Mm.
And the reason I remember that is because it's so rare when you interact with businesses that you hear somebody not only utter such words of ownership, but mean them, not only mean them, but deliver on them. But boy, did he deliver, because he arranged for a limo to take my wife to the local high-end shopping mall. He arranged for a personal shopper to greet her and spend as much time with her as she needed as she searched for a new dress. She found a new dress, accessories, shoes to go with it, came back to the hotel, was so relieved. Ritz Carlton paid for the whole thing, paid for the limo, paid for the dress, paid for it all. And then about an hour before the event, on the day of the event, my wife discovers that the ink cartridge, the anti-shoplifting ink cartridge, is still on the dress.
Oh my
and
God.
We've got less than an hour to spare. So I call down to the front desk to the hotel manager. What does he say to me? Mr. Picoult, I am going to take care of this for you. 20 minutes later, there's a knock at our hotel room door. There's the hotel manager, and beside him is the store employee who he summoned to the hotel with the ink cartridge removal device. And so he removed the ink cartridge from my wife's dress. But wait, now here, this gets back to, this is sort of the analog to the Framebridge example. Because then at the event, we sit down at our table and we're the first ones there. And I'm looking down at the menu, deciding what I'm going to order, and I hear clapping. And I look up, and there at the end of the table is the Ritz Carlton hotel manager and members of his staff applauding my wife in admiration of how beautiful she looks in her new dress. It was like that scene from the Julia Roberts movie, Pretty Woman. And I mean, you got to step back. You got to look at this and say, you got to be kidding me. I mean, this was insane. And I just tell this story over and over again, in every speech I give and, any conversation where Ritz Carlton comes up. And what you can see, if you take a step back, what was going on there? They were so focused on choreographing the recovery and executing it flawlessly. Okay. And then when they knew that they had done that, what that Ritz Carlton hotel manager started to think is he started to shift away from the mechanics of the recovery. And he started to think more along the lines of this. In light of the circumstances, how do I make Mr. and Mrs. Picoult feel special?
Yeah.
And that's got to be when he came up with that great idea to go down and give my wife a standing ovation. And that's what I mean about those, non-operational sort of, deviate from the script type things that just create memorable moments.
We recently did an episode with someone whose rental car was carjacked, and
the opposite.
And it came down to something I think ultimately that stands out to me in your story, which is that they remembered that their customer is a human being, and they treated them as someone who has fears and vulnerabilities and hopes and basic human needs. And in responding to that, we're able to take something that could have been an ultimate obstacle and turned it into an ultimate opportunity.
Yeah. And what you're what I, in my language, what I would say you're referring to is the stir emotion principle, which is one of the 12, because stirring emotion isn't just about accentuating positive emotion. It's also about mitigating negative emotion.
And acknowledging negative emotion.
And so when in a period of failure for your customer at that point is in a position of vulnerability, whether it's my rental car was hijacked, my formal evening gown is ruined. And when your customer is in a position of vulnerability, when you are able to take some of those negative emotions off of the table for them, that is going to infuse the experience with greatness, and they're going to remember it. And so, remembering that they are human and that this can be an emotionally charged situation for them, and approaching the interaction with that, being cognizant of that, I think that can make all the difference.
And I'll be
one of the things
non-mitigation, which can be a change of emotion. It really starts with simply acknowledging and validating the emotion.
Yeah. Like I feel hurt, I feel seen.
That's right. That diffusing the emotion starts so very simply with acknowledging that this is a human being, validating that their emotions are understandable and observed And then, yes, we can move into mitigating and shifting.
Right. And what's interesting, oh, sorry, go ahead, Dave.
What I think is fascinating is that all these years later, Ritz Carlton is still doing this. This is a part of the DNA of Ritz Carlton. It really is. It's what they are about and have been. They and Nordstrom really kind of helped to change the conversation around giving people on the front line control to solve the problem. And to do it in a way that is special and unique. And you see a little bit of that starting to happen actually at Chick-fil-A. This Little Things campaign that they're doing it harkens back to what Ritz Carlton really helped to revolutionize, I think, in the way that we handle problems, which is fantastic.
And I think we all think about these luxury brands having the access to it. And so I do think it's important that we remember that the principles can be applied, as you said in the beginning, at our mom and shop team. And in some ways it's easier because we can agree as a team that this is how we embody our brand and our service. It gets a little more complicated when you have tens of thousands of people who need to embody these skills. And yet, from a values perspective, I think we're showing here that it's absolutely feasible to do that.
Yeah, I mean, you go back to that Ritz Carlton story, and again, what was one of the peaks for me? It was just somebody taking ownership and saying, I've got you. I've got your back. I'm going to take care of this for you. That's not a luxury brand. That's not limited to a luxury brand. Any organization can do that, but it's so rare that customers see companies do that in my opinion, that's an example of something that creates a peak that they remember.
Yeah, sure.
And Dave, I have to tell you, something that's funny when I tell that story about Ritz Carlton in speeches and whatnot, so many times I have people come up to me afterwards and they say, I stayed at that Ritz Carlton too, and you're not going to believe what the story that I've got for you. And what that illustrates is that you're right. This is not a case of, it's not a one-off. It's not inconsistent.
Right.
This is a science to them. And indeed, that general manager at that Ritz Carlton was very good at it. And I was just amazed at how many other stories people in audiences came up to me with, telling me what a wonderful experience they had when something maybe didn't go quite as expected during their stay.
You don't think that they actually manufactured the shrunken dress, do you? I mean, potentially.
I don't. And it's
the conspiracy theorist in me wonders if that's
right.
all part of the overall strategy, right? Create the problem and solve the problem.
It is probably a losing strategy to go out there and figure out how do you anger all your customers so that you can recover in style. Probably not a sustainable approach.
Bit of a gamble there.
Yeah, a bit of a gamble.
Right. Yeah.
All right. So go ahead.
I was going to say this idea of scalable deviation of the peak end theory is kind of what I'm kind of thinking about, here, that how do you scale around, it's one thing to scale around kind of a programmatic peak end type of thing where exactly where the climactic moment is going to be, exactly what's going to be the denouement, what's going to lead to the memory, and to some degree, your example with Framebridge kind of follows that. But when you have to try to scale in such a way where you're actually creating some kind of deviation that happens, I think that's fascinating to think about. How does a company go about doing that? It's really, really impressive, right, when it happens.
Yes, it is. And it doesn't happen by accident, right? It's not a coincidence. What I would say is they're baking it into the design. It is a conscious decision. So, for example, going back to Ritz Carlton, as I'm sure you both know, because it's been written about a lot, every Ritz Carlton employee has $2,000 that they can spend in any given day on any guest to make, solve a problem, do something wonderful for a guest. They're not only empowering people, they're putting money behind that. And so it's by design, right? By design, they are creating that kind of experience, and that helps to make it scalable. Another example would be, this is something Ritz Carlton and also Whole Foods, I find, does. When somebody asks for directions, you never point and tell them where to go. What do? You escort them. You take them. So I'm in Whole Foods. I'm looking for the artichoke hearts. They're not going to just point me to aisle 3. They're going to take me there. That is a signal of advocacy, I would argue. That's a signal of me, the employee, saying, hey, you know what? Whatever I'm doing here in my job isn't nearly as important as making sure you, the customer, get what you need promptly. So I am going to give you the gift of my time, and I'm going to escort you to your destination. That, again, programmatically, if you think about how people at Ritz Carlton and Whole Foods, how they are trained when they come on board, it is not an accident that happens consistently. And so I think that, if you think of it this way, behind all the 12 principles, you could argue, are really a set of employee behaviors that you can encode in people through the onboarding process, through the coaching and development process. And I would say that helps to scale it, even in an organization where a lot of the interactions are happening live, one-to-one, in a widely distributed enterprise.
So in the spirit of finishing strong and ending on a peak, what do you most hope, Jon, businesses of all size will take from this work?
So I would say, number one, recognize that customer satisfaction is a one-way ticket to the business graveyard. The opening line in the book is, if you're aspiring to satisfy your customers, then you're aspiring to mediocrity. And so that's the one key takeaway. The second is the notion that how people remember their experience with your organization is arguably more important than the experience itself. And then the third, I would say, sort of putting those two things together, is what is the alternative to satisfying customers? It's impressing them. It is leaving an indelible impression in their minds, creating the kinds of memories that drive repurchase and referral behavior. And the key takeaway is there's a science to how to do that. All the companies that do it well are dipping into the same tool set, and that tool set can be leveraged for any company of any size in any industry.
Really inspiring and exciting. And so many of these principles are well-time tested. And I think you've just done a really nice job translating them into the CX landscape in ways that companies of all sizes, again, are able to benefit from this wisdom. So for those of you listening, I hope you will do yourself a favor, and more importantly, perhaps do your customer a favor, and check out Jon's book, From Impressed to Obsessed, 12 Principles for Turning Customers and Employees into Lifelong Fans. Jon, we so appreciate you being here today. We so appreciate you joining us in this conversation and this truly important work to help us all build greater value for our customers, for our businesses, and greater trust in customer experience.
Thank you for listening to the Experience Strategy Podcast. If you're having fun nerding out with us, please follow and share wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Find more episodes and continue the conversation with us at experiencestrategypodcast.com.